Hello, especially for the Dirty Secrets channel.
Rebecca Harlow stood motionless in the foyer of her childhood home, dust motes dancing in the shafts of afternoon light. 38 years old, and she felt like a trespassing child again. The house smelled of old books and faint lavender, just as it always had, though her mother had been gone for 3 weeks now. "You don't have to do this today," said Martin, her husband, hovering behind her with an empty cardboard box. "I do," she replied, not turning to face him. "We fly back tomorrow." The old Victorian had been left to her, along with everything inside it, furniture worn smooth by decades of use, paintings that had watched over her youth, and somewhere in her mother's study, the journals. Rebecca had discovered their existence only through the will reading, when the lawyer mentioned personal papers among the items bequeathed. "I'll start in the kitchen," Martin offered, his footsteps receding down the hallway. Rebecca climbed the stairs, each step creaking in familiar places. The study door was closed, as always. Her mother, Professor Eleanor Harlow, eminent psychologist, had maintained strict boundaries between her professional and personal life. As a child, Rebecca knew not to disturb her mother when that door was shut. Now it opened at her touch. The journals were arranged chronologically on the bottom shelf of the mahogany bookcase, leather-bound, with dates embossed on their spines in fading gold leaf. Rebecca's fingers trembled as she pulled out the earliest volume, 1985 to 1986, the year she was born. March 15, 1986 subject are displays normal developmental markers at 3 months. Response to stimuli consistent with control group. The attachment experiment begins tomorrow. I must maintain objectivity despite maternal instincts. This will be my most important work. Rebecca's breath caught. Subject R. She flipped through more pages, scanning entries that documented crying patterns, feeding responses, sleep cycles, all in clinical detached language. June 18, 1986 subject R shows increasing distress when left alone. The delayed response protocol is functioning as hypothesized. Guilt is an impediment to science. I must remember the greater purpose. The room seemed to tilt around her. Rebecca closed the journal and reached for the one beside it, heart hammering in her chest. By evening, Rebecca had read through 3 journals, and a terrible understanding was taking shape. Her childhood, her development, it had been a controlled experiment, meticulously documented by the woman she called Mother. "Becca," Martin's voice drifted up from downstairs. "I found some photo albums you might want to see." "Be down in a minute," she called back, her voice hollow. She opened the 4th journal. September 4, 1990 subject are shows concerning signs of secure attachment despite variable response conditions. Must adjust protocol. The work must not be compromised by sentimentality. Have introduced new relationship stressors to test resilience thresholds. Rebecca remembered that year, her mother suddenly becoming distant, canceling their Saturday park visits, implementing quiet time that left her alone for hours. She had thought she'd done something wrong. Now she understood it had been by design. She slammed the journal shut and pressed her palms against her eyes. "You've been up there for hours," Martin said, appearing in the doorway with a sandwich on a plate. "You should eat something." Rebecca looked up at him, her face ashen. "Did you know your wife was an experiment?" "What are you talking about?" He set the plate down and crouched beside her. She handed him a journal. "My mother was a monster." Martin scanned a few pages, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Rebecca, this can't be what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like. My entire childhood was a psychological experiment. The important research she was always working on, it was me. I was the research. There must be some explanation." "Oh, there is," Rebecca said, her voice tight. "She explains it all very clearly. The effect of inconsistent maternal response on attachment development." That was the title of her groundbreaking paper, the one that made her career. Martin reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I need to be alone." That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. The guest bedroom felt suffocating, though the windows were open to the cool spring air. Martin's steady breathing beside her only emphasized her own restlessness. A memory surfaced. She was 7, homesick from school with a fever. Her mother had taken the day off to care for her, an unusual occurrence. They'd watched old movies together, and Eleanor had stroked her hair until she fell asleep. Was that real affection or just another variable in the experiment? Rebecca slipped out of bed and returned to the study. She found the journal from that year and flipped through until she found the date. November 12, 1993. Subject: are ill today. Suspended protocol to provide care. Note: even brief periods of consistent nurturing produce marked positive emotional response. This reinforces hypothesis on resilience formation. Must resume standard protocol tomorrow to prevent contamination of results. Rebecca stared at the words, tears blurring her vision. Even that memory, one she had treasured, had been clinical observation. The doorbell rang shortly after breakfast. Rebecca opened it to find an elderly man with kind eyes and a tweed jacket. "Rebecca, I'm Dr. Thomas Welling. I worked with your mother for many years. I came to pay my respects." She let him in, watching as he surveyed the house with obvious familiarity. "You've been here before," she said. It wasn't a question. "Many times. Your mother and I collaborated on several research projects." He accepted the coffee Martin offered. "She was brilliant, you know. Her work on attachment theory revolutionized the field." "I know all about her work," Rebecca said coldly. "I found her journals." Dr. Welling's hand froze halfway to his mouth. "Ah, I see. Did you know?" she demanded. "Did you know what she was doing to me?" The old man set down his cup. "It wasn't what you think, Rebecca. She experimented on her own child." "Eleanor loved you desperately," he said quietly. "But she was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of loving you too much. Of failing you." Dr. Welling reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "She asked me to give you this if you ever discovered the journals." Rebecca took it with trembling hands. "I'll leave you to read it privately," he said, rising. "My number is on the back if you want to talk afterward." After he left, Rebecca sat with the sealed envelope for nearly an hour before finding the courage to open it. "My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, you found my journals and must hate me beyond measure. You have every right. What I did was unforgivable, using scientific methodology to distance myself from the terrifying vulnerability of motherhood. When you were born, I was overwhelmed by love for you and by fear. My own mother had been cold, critical, damaging. I was determined not to repeat her mistakes, but I had no model for healthy maternal love. Science was my refuge, my structure. I convinced myself that by approaching motherhood as a research project, I could protect us both. What began as my shield became my prison, and worse, I made it yours as well. The journals document my greatest failure, not as a scientist, but as a mother. What they don't show is how I gradually realized my terrible mistake. By the time you were 10, I understood what I had done. I spent the rest of your childhood trying to repair the damage, though I never had the courage to confess. Truth is, you were never just subject to me. You were my heart walking outside my body, my greatest joy, my deepest terror. I don't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. With love that science could never measure, Mom." Rebecca sat with the letter in her lap, tears streaming down her face. Martin found her there, knelt beside her, and held her while she sobbed. "I remember when things changed," she finally said. "When I was around 10, she became warmer, more consistent. I thought she had finally started to love me." "Maybe she always did, but didn't know how to show it," Martin suggested. Rebecca wiped her eyes and stood up suddenly. "There are more journals. Later ones." They returned to the study, and Rebecca pulled out volumes from her adolescence and beyond. The tone had indeed changed, less clinical, more reflective, documenting not just Rebecca's development but Eleanor's own struggles. April 3, 1996, Rebecca won her piano recital today. I was so proud I could hardly breathe. I sat in the audience wondering if she could feel it, or if the years of my emotional unavailability have made her blind to my love. How do I undo what I've done? As morning light filtered through the curtains, Rebecca sat cross-legged on the study floor, surrounded by open journals. "I think I understand now," she told Martin, who brought her coffee. The experiment ended, but the documentation became something else, a desperate attempt to understand what she'd done and how to fix it. Martin picked up a journal from when Rebecca was in college. October 10, 2004, Rebecca called today, excited about her psychology course. The irony burns. Will she follow in my footsteps? Would that be redemption or my ultimate failure? I want to tell her everything, but fear losing her forever. Perhaps this journal will someday serve as my confession, my apology. She was building a record, Rebecca realized. A case study in what happens when science overcomes humanity and the long road back. And maybe she wanted you to find it someday, Martin added. To understand her. Dr. Welling agreed to meet Rebecca at a cafe the next morning, hours before their flight. "I need to know everything," she told him. "When did you realize what she was doing?" "About a year into her project," he said, looking pained. "I confronted her, told her she had to stop. She wouldn't listen at first. Eleanor was stubborn. But she did stop, eventually. Yes, though it took years. By then, the damage was done to both of you. She spent the rest of her life trying to atone. The work she published on attachment repair in the 90s, Rebecca said slowly. That came from what she learned with me, didn't it? It did. She helped thousands of families because of what she learned through her greatest mistake. She never published her original experiment, couldn't bear to. But the healing methodology she developed afterward, that became her legacy. Did she ever consider telling me the truth? Every day, Dr. Welling said softly. But she feared losing you completely. Rebecca stood in the foyer one last time, boxes packed and ready for the moving company. Martin waited in the rental car outside. The house no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it seemed to hold both darkness and light, much like the woman who had lived there. Rebecca carried the last item, a framed photograph of herself and Eleanor at her college graduation. Her mother's smile contained both pride and sorrow, a complexity Rebecca had never noticed before. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But understanding had taken root, and with it, the possibility of eventually finding peace. The journals were packed carefully in her carry-on. She would read them all in time, not as the victim of an experiment, but as a psychologist herself, and as a daughter trying to understand a deeply flawed mother who had, in her own broken way, loved her. Rebecca closed the door behind her, carrying the weight of echoes, her mother's voice in the journals, her own childhood memories, and the complex truth that lay somewhere between them. Some burdens you put down, others you learn to carry differently. As the taxi pulled away, she opened her mother's final journal to the last entry, written just days before her death. My greatest experiment was not with Rebecca, but with myself, learning if a broken person could become whole enough to love. The results remain inconclusive, but the attempt itself may have been worth something. Rebecca closed the book and looked out the window at the passing neighborhood where she had grown up, a place of both wounds and healing. The experiment was over. What remained was entirely up to her.
Thank you for watching. If you liked the story, like, subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. Thank you.